Good morning, everyone. It's great to see your faces today. And welcome to Sierra Foothills Unitarian Universalists. My name is Amy Evans. I'm a member of the worship committee and a longtime member of this loving community. Today I'm joined by Joan Lactus with music by our music director, Patty Leftridge, and a song by member Jeff Chamberlain. This is part of our summer series on the 6 sources of Unitarian Universalism. Joan and I are going to be talking about humanism and how it shapes our spiritual journey. Our minister, AJ Van Tyne, is normally here leading service about 3 Sundays a week. When he's not here, members of the congregation lead service and share. We share our reflections, insights, learnings as we move through our spiritual journeys and our journeys through life. We are, of course, joined by all of you. We welcome you here today as we join our hearts together to build and maintain our beloved community. This community welcomes you in all the beauty of languages, cultures, and skin tones that come together in your uniqueness. In all the ways you experience and express gender, you are welcome here. In the beauty that is who you love and how you love, you are welcome here. With all the religious and ethical traditions that inform your spiritual life, you are welcome here. Whether you come feeling whole, feeling broken, or anywhere in between, you are welcome here. No matter how long you've been away, nor how soon you will return, you are welcome here. You are invited to join us with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. We welcome you today. I especially welcome newcomers. Our Zoom worship services are not all that different from regular service, which by that I mean we tend to do things pretty differently from week to week in terms of how we cover topics. So every Sunday is a little different, so come back a few times to get to know us. Now I'm going to shift gears and I'm going to invite you, if you have a chalice at home, to join me as we light our chalices together, symbolizing our ongoing bond as a community. I put my faith in you. I put my faith in every one of you who woke up this morning with the weight of loss, manifesting as numbness, anger, fear, or an alienated, aching pain. I put my faith in you, and I pray you will put your faith in me. We need one another now, because we will not make it alone. And now for our opening hymn, With Joy We Claim the Growing Light.
Joy we claim the growing light, advancing thought and widening view. The knowledge of freedom, clearer sight, which from the old unfold the new. With wider view come loftier goal, with fuller light, more good to see. With freedom truer, self-control, with knowledge deeper, reverence be.
Thank you, Patty. All right, now is our time for all ages, and Joan has a story for us.
Good morning. Today in our service, we're talking about how UUs believe that science and reason are an important part of our religious tradition. What that means is that we don't rule out scientific principles or think they conflict with our religious faith. We use science to help us understand how the world works, but we leave room for miracles, mystery, and faith too. But not all religious people have always felt that way. There have been many scientists who were punished for making discoveries that conflicted with what church leaders believed. Galileo was an Italian astronomer who studied the motion of moons and planets in the 1500s, and he was one of those scientists. Let's watch this video about his studies of our moon and Jupiter's moons.
On a November night in 1609, Galileo first pointed his new spyglass at the moon setting behind the hills of Padua and began to sketch what he observed.
From my observations, I have been led to the opinion that the surface of the moon is not smooth, uniform, as a great number of philosophers believe it and the other heavenly bodies to be, but is uneven, rough, and full of cavities and prominences, being not unlike the face of the earth, relieved by chains of mountains and deep valleys.
The moon Galileo saw was Earth-like, and he sketched its features with Earth-like detail.
Galileo had observed the moon through a series of phases, and he apparently made some adaptations to his instrument and began exploring the planets. Now, Jupiter was the one that was in the most favorable position for observation. It was closest to the Earth at that particular point. And when Galileo looked at Jupiter, he saw three very bright little stars, invisible with the naked eye, on a line with Jupiter. And he remarked on that. He had no idea what they were. I mean, he thought that, of course, they were what they used to call fixed stars. In other words, the things that we call stars. But then, since it's such a remarkable configuration, he came back to it the next night. And, well, yes, there were still three stars, but their relative position to Jupiter had changed. And so within a week, he realized that what we have here are moons of Jupiter. Like the moon goes around the Earth, these moons go around Jupiter, and there are 4 of them.
In a little more than a week, Galileo had found the first new astronomical bodies to be discovered since ancient times. This discovery clashed with the common belief that the heavens revolved around the Earth alone. Galileo was exuberant.
He rushed into print. If we date the discovery from the first observation of Jupiter's satellites until he realized they were moons, January the 7th to January the 15th, he was in print by March the 12th. The book was out.
Sidereus Nuncius, the starry messenger, was an enthusiastic announcement of telescopic astronomy. The first printing sold out within days, and news spread across Europe of Galileo and his amazing telescope. Galileo became an advocate for his new astronomy and for scientific observation.
So that's pretty amazing, right? He invented a telescope, and he was the first person to see the surface of our moon and to see moons orbiting Jupiter. So what do you think happened next? Did Galileo become rich and famous and go on TV and get 1 million Instagram followers because of these world-changing discoveries? No, he was arrested and tried for saying things that were in conflict with the teachings of the church. He was placed under house arrest for 9 years until he took it back and said he had been wrong about the science, even though he wasn't wrong. This happened a long time ago, but there are still people right now who don't believe what scientists say. Like there are people who are not believing what scientists say about the coronavirus, partly because their church is telling them to do something different. So we should appreciate how wonderful it is to be a part of a church that wants us to use our minds and our spirits to figure out the world. And as UUs, we also need to learn to work in a world where, like Galileo, we have to figure out how to keep moving forward, even when people who don't believe in science are trying to stand in our way.
Thank you, Joan. That was a great story. Now we're going to move into our time for pastoral prayer for our sorrows and joys. In this community of mutual care, we celebrate the great joys of life together and help share the burden of sorrows and grief. And as such, each week we share specific joys and sorrows from the lives of our members. If you have a joy or a sorrow during the week or something you'd like to share, contact our minister, AJ, or our administrator, Vicki, anytime during the week. This week we have two joys, which is wonderful. Kia Hatch shares a joy. Today, or maybe it was yesterday, is her and her husband's 55-year wedding anniversary. She reports that while it's a quiet celebration, they still enjoy each other and can laugh together. Congratulations, you guys. Ken and I have a joy and update. Our son Jake finally made it to Alaska. He is in the fishing hub of Dutch Harbor, starting a 2-week strict quarantine, guard at his door and all. But soon he'll be out on a fishing boat as a NOAA contracted scientist. For the joys shared, we join you in celebration. For the sorrows and concerns that you have, may you feel our sympathy and compassion. For all that remains unspoken, both joy and sorrow, may the caring of our community offer you both kindness and hope. I invite you now into a time of meditation, reflection, and prayer. And I'll share some words from Reverend Rebecca Parker. The mind's power, the strength of the hands, the reaches of the heart, the gift of speaking, listening, imagining, seeing, waiting, any of these can serve to feed the hungry, to bind up wounds, welcome the stranger, praise what is sacred, do the work of justice, or offer love. And any of these can also draw down the prison door, hoard bread, abandon the poor, obscure what is holy, comply with injustice, or withhold love. You must answer this question. What will you do with your gifts? Choose to bless the world. And while there is injustice, anesthetization, or evil, there moves a holy disturbance, a benevolent rage, a revolutionary love, protesting, urging, insisting that which is sacred will not be defiled. Those who bless the world live their life as a gesture of thanks for this beauty and this rage. The choice to bless the world can take you into solitude to search for the sources of power and grace, native wisdom, healing, and liberation. More, the choice will draw you into community, the endeavor shared, the heritage passed on, the championship of struggle, the importance of keeping faith, the life of ritual and praise, the comfort of human friendship, the company of earth, the chorus of life welcoming you. None of us can save the world. Together, that is another possibility waiting. I invite you to continue in the spirit of reflection, meditation, and prayer as we listen to the hymn, Voices Still and Small.
voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing in storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still will remain singing, calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing. Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing in storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still will remain singing, calling my tears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing.
Good morning. The fifth source that we draw from as Unitarian Universalists is humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. The philosophy of humanism was articulated in 1933 in the Humanist Manifesto written by a group of men from the Chicago area, many of whom were Unitarians. It was not designed as an anti-religious statement, but a description of a new way of interpreting religious feeling and belief. The manifesto includes the statement that the goal of humanism is a society in which people voluntarily and intelligently cooperate for the common good. Obviously, we're not there yet. Humanists demand a shared life and a shared world. And so humanism fits with our Unitarian Universalist focus on using our spirituality to improve the world as it is now, rather than expecting God to do it or waiting for an afterlife. I don't consider myself a true humanist according to the manifesto, but I certainly believe that humans are responsible for creating the world we want, and that science and reason can help us achieve this. But I am also enough of a human beingist to understand that humans are a bundle of contradictory impulses that can lead us to unreasonable behavior. The part of this source that warns against idolatry of the mind, I think, is reminding us that science doesn't explain everything. And if we don't consider human fears, emotions, and behaviors, we may not be able to work with other people to reach our goals. I worked as a scientist and a science teacher, and I certainly believe in the use of reason and the scientific method. But I also believe in some version of God, and it is paradoxically science that convinced me of this. When I was a sophomore in high school, I learned about the periodic table, It seemed so perfectly orderly that I felt like I saw God in it. Not the God of the Bible, who would punish my sins, or who could make the 49ers win if I prayed hard enough. It just made me think that there was some divine perfection in the universe that had created this order. So humanism for me doesn't create any conflict between religion and science. I don't have to choose one and exclude the other. That's why we have 6 sources to draw from. But there have always been and still are conflicts between religion and science for some people. And it can be instructive for us to look at these conflicts and see where reason and a dedication to improving the human lot can help us. One of the earliest conflicts between science and religion was in the area of astronomy and explaining the motions of heavenly bodies, which I referred to in the story of Galileo. Long, long ago, it seemed simple. The Bible described the universe as a 3-story building with stars and heaven on the top floor, earth in the center, and hell in the basement. The earth was the focus of God's attention, and we were his people. And any reasonable person could see by observing the motions of celestial bodies that the earth stood still and everything went around it. The church discouraged people from making more careful observations or studying the natural world too closely, saying it distracted people from studying God. Go not out of doors, St. Augustine said. In the inner man dwells truth. And even today, we have a stable genius in the White House who embraces this philosophy to the point that he believes that whatever dwells in his head is the God-given truth. But fortunately, there have always been curious men and women who believed in making careful observations and measurements so they could explain and predict the natural world. One of the earliest problems that careful observers of the heavens had was the problem of 4 wandering stars that did not appear to orbit the Earth. They moved back and forth at different times of the year, not in any regular orbital kind of way. Astrologers believed that this backward motion, called retrograde, caused disruptions in people's horoscopes here on Earth. And when scientists started making measurements and trying to do mathematical calculations, they could not draw a simple orbital system with the Earth at the center that explained retrograde motion. One of the earliest scientists to make detailed measurements and calculations and try to make a mathematical model of the solar system was the Greek astronomer Ptolemy. In the 1st century AD, he used measurements from a few hundred years earlier and came up with a diagram that could pretty accurately model the movement of the Earth, the Sun, the Moon, and these 4 wandering stars, or planets, which is the Greek word for wanderer. Ptolemy was committed to keeping the Earth in the center and the Sun and Moon in orbits around it. This wasn't for religious reasons, but because it was obviously true. This is another of those idolatries of the mind things. Things that seem obviously true aren't always true, and we need to constantly question our assumptions. But back to Ptolemy's model. He put the 4 planets in a separate orbit, but he had to make them do loopy-loops within the orbit to explain their motion. His model did, however, pretty successfully explain their motion. Since Ptolemy's model of the solar system agreed with the Bible, eventually it became the official doctrine of the church and remained so for 1400 years. Consider that if you're feeling like 4 years is a long time to wait for people to see reason. It wasn't until 1539 that Polish scientist Nicholas Copernicus published a mathematical model that placed the sun at the center and the Earth and the 4 other known planets in orbit around it. Copernicus was a religious man. He worked for the Catholic Church, and he was not in any way trying to challenge religious beliefs or conflict with the Bible. He sent his publications to the Pope and to various religious leaders to make sure they were okay with it. The church didn't have a big problem with Copernicus's work because he said that he wasn't trying to say that this was actually physically how the solar system was arranged, just that his model predicted things pretty well. The church didn't have much of a problem with this model until there was another outside threat to their power. This came in 1591 when Martin Luther developed his theses which established the Protestant church. Luther and the Protestants insisted on a more literal interpretation of the Bible. They wanted the Catholic Church to declare Copernicus a heretic. They didn't have enough power or influence at first, but they were gaining momentum all the time. And as they grew, the Catholic Church felt more threatened and retreated into more fundamentalist ideologies. The Protestants had started holding witch trials, which proved enormously popular, and forced the Catholic Church to begin holding more trials of heretics. So 20 years later, when Galileo developed his comprehensive studies of gravitation and planetary motion and published them in 1610, the position of the Catholic Church had hardened. Galileo invited church leaders to look through his telescope to see for themselves what he had seen. Not only did they refuse to look through the telescope, they banned any further teaching of Copernican theories from then on. Instead, as I said during the story, he was convicted of heresy by the Inquisition and placed under house arrest for the next 9 years. The charges against him weren't dropped by the Catholic Church until 1992. So why am I telling this story? Because I think it reflects the idolatry of the mind problem and the conviction that if you have the right scientific evidence, it is going to sway people and carry the day. But we live and have to be able to work in a world full of not so reasonable people. And remember that they are also humans worthy of respect. I see a parallel with what's happening today in America, where we have progressive people believing they have the facts about things like climate change and pandemics, but they are confronted with political leadership that doesn't accept the science. And these leaders have found an audience in people who have been feeling buffeted about by cultural and political change in America, and they feel left behind. Over the last 50 or 60 years, many more conservative-leaning people have felt that their values and religious beliefs have come under attack by cultural shifts that they don't like. And some, like the early Protestants, have gone looking for witches to burn. They have retreated into more fundamentalist theologies. Some are falling for right-wing hate speech, rejecting climate science, and are now rejecting public health directives in the face of a deadly disease. And our commitment to science and reason isn't going to sway them. They are not going to look through the telescope and see what we see. So what does our humanist tradition call us to do when we can't use reason to change other people's minds and get them to work with us? Sometimes we just want to howl with outrage, but this just drains our spiritual resources without changing anyone's mind, since mostly we're only howling at each other. Maybe we need less moral outrage and more moral imperative. If we find ourselves posting angry rants on social media and our conversations are devolving into angry reactions to the latest tweet, let's pause and refocus our energy and attention on moving forward. There are positive, useful things we can post and share and do. Let's post the dates and times of local government meetings, school board, city council, county commissioner. And let's go to the meetings and tell them we want more community services and less military-style policing, that we want environmental sustainability plans. We can support local candidates for office, but we can also run for office ourselves. We can participate in our UU the Vote campaign that Amy will talk more about. And we can dedicate our energy to raising anti-racist children and grandchildren so that they can model that behavior for future generations. Our humanist sources tell us that we must do all these things to bring justice to all people. But we also need to take care of ourselves emotionally and spiritually. Resting and having fun are sources of our creativity and are critical for our spiritual strength, resilience, and survival over the long haul. Whatever happens in November, the struggle for racial, environmental, and economic justice will go on for many years. One of the ways we take care of our spiritual needs is by participating in our SFUU community. We can come to worship services and chat with people before and after so that we're connecting with people that can feed us the positive energy that we need. And there might be times when you feel like you have enough positive energy, but someone else might be flagging and you might be the spark that inspires them to keep going. I'm going to wrap up with these words that are often attributed to Martin Luther King, but they actually originated with Unitarian minister and abolitionist Theodore Parker. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice. Parker goes on to say that God is just and implies that God will surely end slavery soon. Our humanist tradition tells us that it wasn't God who ended slavery 7 years later. And if the arc is to bend, it is we humans who must do the bending. Thank you. Generosity is a spiritual practice of this congregation. When we offer our time, talents, and treasure, we deepen our engagement and become part of building the beloved community together. As part of our ethic of generosity, we also split our collection plate with a local community organization aligned with our values. This month, the Share the Plate recipient is Save the Auburn Ravine Salmon and Steelhead, or SARSIS. This is a local nonprofit organization whose mission is to restore our streams and the American River so that these fish may once again return upstream to their historic spawning grounds. To support SARSIS and SFUU today, you can follow the link in the chat or navigate to our website, mysfuu.org, and click Give to SFUU. Here you can donate to SFUU at any time for our Share the Plate recipient or directly to SFUU. As always, you may mail donations or pledges directly to the church at our 190 Finley Street address. If this is your first time visiting us, please let us know that you are our guest and there is no expectation that you will participate. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
Galileo's head was on the block. Crime was looking up the road. And as the bombshells of my daily fears explode, I tried to trace them or annihilation in my lifetime. I'm still not right. I offer thanks to those before me. That's all I've got to say. Maybe you squandered big bucks in your last life, and now I have to pay. But then again, it feels like some sort of inspiration to let the next life unfold. To say, look what I had to overcome from my last life. I think I'll write a book. So how long till my soul gets it right? Could any human being ever reach the highest height? I call on the resting soul of Galileo, king of night vision, king of insight. So how long till my soul gets it right? So how long till my soul gets it right? It's how long?
Awesome. Love that song. Thank you so much, Jeff. I am not a lifelong UU. Like many of you, I found Unitarian Universalism during a time of loneliness, despair. Luckily, I had the welcoming community of SFUU to hold me. But as a new UU, I don't have the 6 sources of our faith memorized. Today we're focusing on humanism, and I have a few things to say related to that. But before I start, I'm going to read through the 6 sources. The first one, direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and the openness to the forces which create and uphold life. So this idea of the mystery and wonder of the world, etc., that feels pretty good to me. I understand the power of nature, of the mystery that surrounds us, and there's been effects definitely on my spiritual growth. The second one is words and deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures with evil and justice, with structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. I really like this one. I've been inspired recently by the words of John Lewis and others as we live through this tumultuous time. The third one is wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. This one seems pretty obvious. I know I and my family have spent a lot of time understanding other religions and learning from them. Fourth one is Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Okay, I was raised Episcopalian. That one's pretty easy for me to understand. The next one, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. This one is very meaningful to many of the members of SFUU who identify as pagans or relate to the teachings of Native Americans. And then humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the reason and results of science and warn us against the idolatries of the mind and spirit. Okay, reason and science, that's pretty obvious. Joan covered that in her wonderful reflection. The warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit confused me a little bit. Joan touched on it, cleared it up somewhat, and then the UUA has an explanation that really helped me, which is that as a non-dogmatic faith, Unitarian Universalism honors the differing paths on which we each travel. So I really like that. All right, so I got that out of the way, just a refresher. And I want to talk a little bit more about humanism, because it's more than just heeding the guidance of reason and the results of science. It's really a lot more than that. There's a Humanist Manifesto that the American Humanist Association published. There's an old one from the 30s, and they've done an updated one that I found to be a lot more meaningful than the simple statement that's in the UU 6 sources. Of course, I have a lot of compassion for the people at the UUA who tried to distill an entire manifesto down to a sentence, but that aside. But I'm going to not read you the entire Humanist Manifesto. It's like 6 pages long, and there's 6 main ideas, but there's one that has really been dogging me all week as I thought about humanism and whether I really can ascribe to it. And that is that part of humanism is working to benefit society, and that maximizes individual happiness. On the surface, I can't disagree with this, but what I've been struggling with, particularly over the last 4 years, as I've watched America become or show itself as a country where a large portion of the population lives by an every man for himself philosophy. I feel like that has really detracted from this principle that the humanists believe. And it's so sad that this idea of helping people in need has become politicized. It's like there's a certain mental pathology that has grown to near dominance in this country. And that is that people can't be trusted and people are inherently bad. I was raised in a divided household. My mother was a Democrat, my father was a Republican. For the most part, they didn't really discuss that, politics or fight over that. But I do remember one epic battle, which really gets at the heart of the gap that I see in our country. So my parents owned a rental condo. I think there were two units in Tracy. We were living in Pleasanton. And I'm pretty sure at the time they managed it themselves. So they had to deal directly with the tenants. At some point, a new tenant turned out to be a battered woman who had fled an abusive marriage. She moved into the condo with almost nothing. My mom rallied her friends at their Episcopal church, and they rounded up furniture, kitchen items, etc., all kinds of stuff for this woman and her children. At some point, she couldn't pay the rent one month, and my dad wanted to kick her out. And a battle ensued for a month. And when I say they fought, there were yelling fights about this. And my dad finally won the battle and had the woman evicted. And I understand he had a mortgage to pay, but that didn't really seem to be the point with him. His point was based on this basic distrust of people. All throughout her efforts to get this lady's place set up, he complained constantly about how she was taking advantage of my mother, she was probably lying, etc. I have lived most of my life like my mother, believing, as the humanists and our first principle proclaim, in the basic goodness and inherent worth of each person. But over the last 10 years or so, I have begun to question that belief. But I am not going to allow myself to fall for this pessimism. I think most people do care about others, even people who I believe have fallen, shall we say, fallen in with the wrong crowd. I know we're all slightly flawed, and I know we can all be influenced by both good and bad people. I think a lot of what's wrong with society today can be traced to the simple fact that people no longer see it as useful to work to benefit our society. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to continue to do that myself. And I'm constantly encouraging young people in my life to try to see the point the humanists are making, that working to benefit society makes you happy. We are all part of something bigger than ourselves. Find a way, even in the pandemic, to participate. So I'll put a plug in here for the Vote Forward campaign that many of us are participating in. We are preparing letters for voters who are registered but don't always vote. And our letters, personal letters, encourage them to vote. You don't even have to leave your house to participate. There's always a way to help, and to help your own spiritual and mental well-being. Find a way to contribute. It will make you feel better. You can find out more about Vote Forward at voteforward.org, or reach out to our member Carol Coons, and she has lots of ideas on how to participate in the upcoming election. All right, our closing hymn is "Life is the Greatest Gift of All."
Life is the greatest gift of all, the riches on this earth. Life and its creatures, great and small, of high and lowly birth. So treasure it and measure it with deeds of shining worth. Mind is the brightest gift of all, its thought no barrier mars. It seeks creation's hidden plan, its quest surmounts all bars. It rains the wind, it chains the storms, it weighs the outmost stars. We are of light, its shining gift, the measure of all things. Up from the dust our temples lift, our vision soars on wings. For seed and root, for flower and fruit, our grateful spirit sings.
Thank you, Patty. Joan, give us our closing words.
I'll close with these words by UU minister of the UU Church of the Philippines, Ma Teresa Gustilo Gallardo. Some came here to be blessed with answers in a tumultuous world. Let us hope too, however, that many of us have been blessed with questions to direct us with clarity of mind, to steer our logic towards kindness and justice always. And then our final closing words, if we can join virtual hands. As we go forth, may we carry the flame
of peace and love until we meet again. Blessed be.